Hello, everyone. My name is David Morris. I'm the publisher of Lake Drive Books, where we publish books that help you heal, grow, and discover. And I am delighted today to be joined by two authors who contributed to this book, You Are Not Your Trauma. First, I'll introduce Caroline Beidler, who is a recovery advocate and also the author of Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery, and founder of the recovery storytelling platform Circle of Chairs. Caroline, you have 20 years in leadership within social work and ministry, and a correspondent with Recovery Today magazine, founder and host of annual International Women's Day Global Recovery event, and a consultant with JBS International, and you are in Tennessee. And then Diana Dallas, who we are joined with as well. You are retired from 35 years as a professional social worker, and you spend time with family gardens volunteering at the local food pantry and church ministries. And you're in Wisconsin. And I think the thing that's most important is that you two are related.
That is very,
What, is,
very,
what
very
does that
important.
make you, Diana Dallas? Sorry, I looked at your name and read it backwards.
That makes me Caroline's mother.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's such a treat to have you in this book.
It's really an honor to be included in it. I've always wanted to write a book. In the past, I've written little episodes and things that I've journaled a lot. So this is really a lifelong dream of mine to be included in a book, write a
Yeah.
book.
Hey, so let's do something spontaneous here. I said these interviews are formal. Diana, what do you think You Are Not Your Trauma is about? Why did Caroline write this book? How would you describe it? And you don't have to say the whole thing, but just what is it off the top of your head? What is this book about?
This book is about it's basically for everyone, but it's letting people know that even if you've had trauma in your past, that doesn't have to affect who you are now, that you can basically rise above your past, and you don't have to let that limit who you are right now in your life. It's a book of hope, basically, and it's letting people know. Caroline has lists some ways that can be very helpful for people in terms of she has five ways that can be very helpful for people in terms of not being your trauma. For me, being in the book, it's been a really empowering experience. It's made me feel free because I'm letting people know, I'm letting people in and letting people know who I am, and basically letting them know that it's okay to be who they are, that we don't have to carry the shame that we've had in our past. We don't have to carry that into the future. So it's an honor to be in this book, and it's extremely empowering for me.
That's well said, that last part, especially because writing is about self-expression. It's about bringing something into being. And in this case, you're giving people permission. You're telling your story, which gives people permission to tell their story. It's also meant in a helpful, even expert context. So Caroline, Diana is your mom. Do you agree? Do you agree with that summation?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can't disagree with my mother. I have to agree, but in this case, I definitely do. And I want to just echo too, it's been such an honor to do this with my mom. And interestingly, it was a couple of years ago in the mail, I received this really large manila envelope addressed from her and opened it up, and it ended up being this pages and pages manuscript of her writings and some really vulnerable, moving description of things that she had been through, about her own healing journey of trauma. And as being a trauma survivor myself, as I was reading my mom's experience, it really just hit me that not only do we have a lot that we have shared, the hard things that we've experienced healing together and gone through our own journeys of healing. And her words and my words together, it just struck me when I read her manuscript that we could bring something from that. We could do something with that to help other people. And so that's ultimately my hope for the book, is that it moves other people on their own journey of healing from trauma.
So let's hear in your words too some more, Caroline, about what the book is about. And before our talk just now, I was skimming through the book again, And I came across a phrase that you wrote that where you say, and it's a little bit later in the book, you can get to a place where dreams come back. You say dreams can come true, they come back. That's a really interesting statement. Can you expand on that in light of a book called You're Not Your Trauma?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can speak from my personal experience and then countless folks I've worked with over the years. But there's a time in our lives often when we experience some type of trauma. A lot of times that happens in childhood and it interrupts. I think, for those of us who've experienced it, this natural way of being human and hoping and dreaming and wanting things for our lives. And I remember I experienced significant trauma as a child, and then again as a teen, and then again as a young adult. It's like every hope and dream I had for myself didn't exist anymore. I couldn't even see that story where I had a happy marriage and I was a mother, beautiful children, and I had a job that I loved and I had a purpose. It just wasn't there. The dream was gone. I had that dream before some of the things I experienced, before I went through some of those things. So my own healing journey, and I've witnessed it in the lives of other people too, and mom, in your life, where you get to a point in your healing where all of a sudden you can dream again. All of a sudden, it's like my life, there's this possibility and hope there. And the book, I hope for the book too, is that it not only shows readers and people that that's possible, that dreams can come back, but moves them, not just shows, but moves readers to go on their own journey of exploration to discover that truth.
Talk about, oh, I'm sorry, Diana, were you going to say something?
I was going to say this book isn't about details of abuse and anything like that. It's just to let people know that they're not alone with their trauma. It's not, we don't, everybody has their own trauma in their own way. And I don't think it's necessary, at least we're not doing that in this book to make everything explicit. It's more about
Mm.
you're not alone. And like Caroline said, there's hope. There's hope out there. By sharing my story, I'm hoping people can feel free to share their own.
You talk in the book, it's a book about You're Not Your Trauma, and you can create a new story. Talk about how our story of trauma, it becomes part of who we are. That never goes away. My own background in psychology has taught me enough to know that you can't deny your past. In fact, you talk about this, I think, in the book as well. Honoring your story. Let's see, getting honest with yourself is one of the key rhythms of the 5 rhythms. So talk about how is it that you can hold on to a very painful part of the past, but also create a new story? And I know that's a big question, but I think that's a really key one for this book.
No, I love that question so much. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and certainly in writing the book, and just my mother and I have experienced together. But I think we can hold multiple things at one time. For what's true for me is that I have experienced significant trauma, but today, because I've gone through some significant healing and recovery from those experiences, I can hold that this is what happened to me, but it's not who I am. And I think for a long time, what happened to me became my identity and who I was. I didn't feel like I had agency. I was acting out really unhealthy patterns. You talk a lot about that in the book, a lot of unhealthy relationships. Talk a lot about that in the book, to the point of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote about that and that and that. But I was just acting out these trauma symptoms and really identifying with what happened. But I think the new story and reframing that, and where I am today, and where I've seen so many people, and Mom, including you, where we can say, yes, this is what I've experienced, but today I can see that with new eyes, and this vision of resilience, where these experiences made me stronger. It's not who I am. It's not my identity. Today, I can use those experiences to hopefully help other people.
Is that,
I
do
think
you
I
agree with
went-
that, Diana?
I do. I went through a stage in my healing where I basically, as Caroline said, I identified with my trauma. And I thought that if I stopped thinking about it and stopped talking about it, I thought that that was denying that it happened. And I thought I needed to keep that memory alive in me because I knew it was true and I knew it happened. It's really interesting and it's wonderful to get to the point where you can just set it, like Caroline, set it in the past, realize it happened, but it's not who you are today. You can live in the present, still have that in your past. You don't deny it, and you can admit that it's there, but it doesn't impact your life. It doesn't limit your life now.
How does that connect with relationships and community that you're in? So, for example, perhaps a past identity meant you were connected to certain people in certain ways. And then writing a new story sometimes means changing those relationships or coming up with new ones. Either one of you, does that ring a bell?
For me, I had lots of unhealthy relationships earlier in my life. It's kind of one after the other after the other. And for a while, I felt like I would be nothing if I didn't have a relationship with a man. It's interesting to come to the point now when I visit Caroline, I've been included in some of the recovery meetings and some of the recovery activities. And I realize how dedicated these people are to their healing and how accepting they are, no matter what's happened to you and what your past has been. And I haven't felt accepted by people like I have by the recovery community. It's just an amazing experience to me. So I've shifted a lot of my friendships. It'll be interesting with this book. I've said a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about me. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it affects the friendships that I have now. I think they're strong enough to withstand that, but it'll be interesting to see if it affects people, it affects
Mhm.
my friends.
Mhm.
But the recovery community, I feel, is always there for me. And that's really an awesome place to be.
Caroline, why would you think Diana says it'll be interesting to see if what she says in the book will affect her relationships or her friendships? What effect might it have potentially? And Diana, you can jump in on that too, but I just thought I'd bounce it over to Caroline.
I've been in that place. I think when we write about really tough topics, and David, I know one of the reasons I love Lake Drive books is you don't shy away from those deep, hard, important topics. But when we're writing about things like trauma in recovery, there's sometimes things that we share that make people uncomfortable. I would give you some examples, but I don't want to give away too much of the book for folks. But talk about some tough relationships and experiences that I'm not proud of. I could still have shame today about those, and thankfully I don't. But I know that people that I have in my life who support me will not be judgmental, will welcome me with grace. And I agree with my mom. I have found that accepting, non-judgmental place to be in the recovery community, in the downstairs church, quote unquote. That's why I wrote my first book. But I think sometimes, again, when we really dive into tough topics and are brutally honest, I think it can bring up things for people and almost be like a mirror, make people uncomfortable and start thinking about some of their own things. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, you have a psychology background more than I do, so you may have a little better insight into that. But I feel for what you're going through, Mom, and I think I've struggled a little bit with that, just talking so openly and sharing so much and really being radically honest, which is one of the rhythms in the book. We're practicing what we preach here. Being radically honest about our experiences can be hard, but those people that really love us and support us will be with us no matter what.
I'd like to get to I'd like to stick with that radical honesty theme for a second and ask about Diana's interludes, but then let's talk also about the five rhythms as we work our way through this interview and then wrap up. So Caroline, what was your idea? Why have your mom? What does your mom contribute to the book, and why did we decide to do that? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I didn't feel like there was a book without her being a part of it. She has been so instrumental in my own recovery journey. And I think because we've experienced such similar things, our stories highlight really what intergenerational and that family trauma piece is all about. And it does it in such a real, tangible, human way that it was like, there is no book without my mom. And her interludes are just so moving and so touching. And I think it really adds something to the book where you have this new voice and these new stories that come into it. Just makes it such a rich experience, I think, for the reader. And I know I've heard from folks who've had a couple or even able to read an early copy that are just really blown away by her experiences throughout the book. So I can't say enough, Mom, how grateful I am that you wanted to do this together. I know sometimes you're probably like, why did I agree to this? Especially when we're doing podcasts and all of these things, but I'm so grateful.
So Diana, Caroline's writing in the bulk of the book is her telling her story, but is mostly to propel forward insights and ideas and practical steps. So it's more expository, whereas your entries, which I'm not going to remember, there's probably one for each chapter or something like that. They're called interludes in the book. That's just you telling your story in sort of general terms.
I just, what I did is, these are journal entries that I've had over the years.
Mm.
And the interludes in the book basically go from some trauma, how I felt about my trauma is basically what it's about. And the interludes build on each other and show how you can go from where I was in the beginning to the ending, where how I am now, even though I had those traumatic experiences. It's an honor to have those in there. And I really, I know I said this before, but I feel a real sense of freedom. And I feel like people are going to identify with some of the feelings that I've had, because they're not always things. For example, rage, it's not always talked about. It's not a cool thing to discuss, but there was a point I had a lot of rage about my trauma, and I write about that. So I'm thinking people can identify with the things that I wrote. Like I said, again, it's giving hope to people.
I, as a editor and reader of the book myself, I found the experience of seeing Caroline's writing, then the interludes, which are more storytelling from a different point of view, from the mother's point of view. It helped illuminate definitely the intergenerational trauma concept and understanding that, whoa, let's look at our family here. There's a lot going on that has impacted us more than we realize. And it kind of helped that thread, but it also made the book, and this is what's great about good books, is it made it a great reading experience. It's a lot to take and to think through about our own lives and what's happened in the past and how we find and take steps forwards. It's a slow process. There is no one book that's going to turn it all around for you. This is just hopefully a very helpful and important, but still just one small piece of someone's path and journey. And so I just want to say I think that it accomplishes what you wanted to accomplish very well in making this a very enjoyable book to read. Caroline, talk a little bit about how did you come about coming up with 5, you don't have to summarize them all necessarily, but 5 rhythms for uprooting unhealthy patterns and healing the family tree. What do you mean by rhythms, maybe? And say what those are supposed to help people with, or how they're supposed to help.
I think the rhythms really emerged, I think, as I was writing, going through the writing process, and certainly had a lot of help and input from folks on that. But I love the idea of rhythm because to me, it's all about movement. In recovery, the recovery journey, whether that's addiction recovery or trauma recovery, it's a process. It's an ongoing thing. We're not arriving at some destination where we're healed. We are always going through this process and this journey. And so the rhythms that I talk about in the book, and we touched on a couple, including radical honesty. One of my favorites is, and has been so impactful in my own life, is learning how to value and honor myself, honoring the temple of who I am through asserting boundaries. That's something we talk a lot about in the book. I don't want to give it all away because I think folks need to and will really be grateful that they've picked up the book, purchased a copy. It is up for pre-order now and available in September on the 24th. but rhythms are intended to move the reader through a process of their own journey. And I love at the end of each rhythm, so there's 5 rhythms, we include some practical steps, some questions for reflection. You can journal, some ideas for how you can take some of the information that you've learned and actually apply it to your life. And I have a really fun, deep complement to the book that is for folks who pre-order, but it's a guided journal that will actually provide more help and walking the reader through some of these rhythms. So I'm hoping, we're both hoping, my mom and I, that it's a process for the reader and it's a journey that really we can go on together.
Great. And just a note, I'll put a link to a way where they can find out more about the guided journal in the notes to this video.
Right.
Well, that's terrific. Well, there's just so much practical help. And like I said, with good book reading too, it just, when you read a book, it helps you to slow down and think and ponder and reflect on your own life. And I think there's so much to offer there. So maybe a little bit by way of wrapping up, I'd like to ask you both what have you done professionally in your life? I don't know, we talked about that enough. I read the sort of formal bio, but I would like to just maybe just hear a little bit more about that. Diana, I know you're retired, so
I'm retired.
your priorities are different. And you
My
have more,
priorities are really,
and you're the one who probably has the most energy among us working people here. So, or we're like crazy with our jobs sometimes. But you had years and years as a LPN, so that's licensed practical nurse, but
correct.
then mostly MSSW. You were a social worker.
Correct. I was a social worker. I worked in many different fields, but I basically had a special liking for the medical social work aspect and geriatrics. So there's been times that I worked in the nursing home toward the end of my life or the end of my career, but I spent a lot of years in medical social work in the hospital. I did medical social worker in the home. I did hospice. I loved hospice. So those were basically the areas that I focused my practice on. When I was younger, it's like I became an LPN, a practical nurse, and I was trying to decide, do I want to be an RN or do I want to be a social worker? And I picked social worker, first of all, because I didn't think it would take as long, which is how you think back then. But I also realized I really like the people aspect. I love feeling like I'm being of service to people.
Mhm.
So that's why I became a social worker. And I've never regretted that. It's been a wonderful profession for me.
And I think it stands out. It's not stated explicitly in the book that you have this amazing professional experience, but you too struggle with trauma. You too were someone who had to become your own focus, your own patient, so to speak, your own client.
Exactly,
And I think,
exactly. And just lately I've been looking back on my life and thinking one of the main characteristics I identify with myself is compassion. And I think earlier in my life, compassion, I identified with the pain of other people. And I think that touched me so deeply because it brought out my own pain. But I think I've progressed to the point where I can be compassionate without it drawing up pain from myself. So I think I've also learned and grown from the profession.
mm,
I've been able to give, but I think I can now be truly compassionate with
mm.
people.
Caroline, over to you. It says MSW there in your name, and you've done a number of things. You lead or are involved with recovery groups. You're a keynote speaker at recovery get-togethers, and you have a day job too that's in the mental health field. But just tell us about yourself professionally. What keeps you going busy all the time?
Yeah, well, first off, I have to say I was quite surprised that when I was in recovery and deciding to go back to graduate school, that I was going to get my master's in social work like my mother. I thought, oh my gosh, I really am following in her footsteps. But I also have no regrets there. I've learned so much from my mom about being a compassionate person, and she has gone through so much in her life.
Mm,
I have too, but seeing how she in her life, despite that, or maybe because of that, she learned more about how to have compassion and how to be there for others. And so that has always been a huge motivating factor in any of the work that I do. And so I did go back to school after a couple years in recovery. I talk about that in the book too.
By the way, the word compassion features very prominently in the book. That's a good word. Just want to point that out. Sorry, keep going.
Oh no, and I love the idea of compassion and really, I think, suffering with others. That is such a wonderful place we can be in. We don't have to be alone in what we struggle with. So really all of my work is centered around that. I've developed recovery support services. I created a recovery house for women years ago. I created a collegiate recovery program, a peer support program in Wisconsin, done a lot of developing programs. And now in my life, I worked one-on-one mentoring. I'm a trained, basically licensed social worker. I could do counseling. I would have to go back for some certifications, but I've been trained as a mental health provider. And I also today do a lot of writing and support for federal agencies. So Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, Office of Recovery, a lot of folks at the federal level who are exploring ways to support addiction recovery, trauma recovery, and I'm just grateful to be a part of those conversations. So definitely compassion is just something I connect with so much, and I'm grateful to be able to follow in my mom's footsteps there.
It sounds to me, Caroline, like your professional life has both led you to work with people and encounter people one-on-one and in groups. And by the way, if you were, if you did do, if the one-on-one part was more part of your work, I think I would definitely be interested in because you just come across as somebody who would be really good at that. But you also have a wider view of what's going on in the mental health industry, what's going on with recovery efforts on socially. I think that makes you even more qualified than perhaps a typical clinician who's working with people just on a one-on-one basis. You're looking out for something that is about change that happens on a broader level, hence the theme of generational trauma, intergenerational trauma in the book. I think it's fascinating. I think you and your mom and Diana and the book have so much to offer. It's not just your simple little self-help book, pick up on recovery. There's more going on here, but it's also just very direct and good storytelling and straightforward help. So thank you both. Is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention?
No, not for me.
No, I think this is so great and just so wonderful to connect. And David, we're so grateful for your support of the book and what Lake Drive Books has brought to the process. I cannot speak highly enough about you and your work in Lake Drive.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And people can find you where, Caroline?
CarolineBeidler.com. You can find all of the things, including pre-order links, my books, and also I'm on Substack at Circle of Chairs.
Which is, we didn't talk about that, but that's a wonderful storytelling platform. Talk about that for just a second. What does that offer?
So Circle of Shares on Substack, I have my weekly letter that goes out. I do a lot of guest writing and collaborating with other authors on Substack. And then complement to that, I have Circle of Chairs storytelling platform where people can actually submit their stories of recovery and healing. And I love to connect with folks that way and really help elevate other folks' stories, your stories of recovery and resilience.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Everybody go out and buy this book. Look in the show notes for more about how to find these things and get in touch with both Diana and Caroline. And they would love to hear from you. Thanks both.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us.